Welcome, everybody. My name is Scott Sinclair, and this is a new podcast called The Grow. You want to know what I hear about every single day? What do I hear every day in the cannabis industry globally? Globally, what do I hear? I hear this industry is dead. Margins are down. There's no cohesive regulatory framework. There's no global market. It's just a mishmash of ring-fenced, isolated regional markets that don't work together very well at all. Public markets have abandoned ship. Capital markets have abandoned ship. Investors have pulled back. Capital is gone. The businesses are struggling under the weight of debt and taxes. The bottom line question I get for the cannabis industry almost every day is, hey, Scott, is there any money for this industry? Is there any money for my business? Well, the answer is yes, there is. It's limited. It's limited right now, for sure. You have to be creative. You have to be bulletproof in your execution. But there is capital available for you. Gone are the days, let's be honest. Gone are the days when you could wander into the Canadian capital markets. You remember those days way back when? You could have just what? Nothing. A PowerPoint deck. And your PowerPoint deck said, I can convert a tomato and cucumber greenhouse of 600,000 square feet into a cannabis greenhouse. And everybody would say, oh, cool. Here's $50 million at $150 million valuation. Happened every day. Do you remember the funded capacity argument? If you're Canadian, this won't work for the US part of this audience or the global part of this audience. But in Canada, where this all started, there was a concept of funded capacity, and that's where the investment bankers and the capital markets would value your business, not based on the greenhouse, which is already stupid enough to say, hey, I got 600,000 square feet, I should have some multiple of that. No. It wasn't just that. It was, I have 600,000 square feet, plus I think I can build another 400,000 square feet, so you should value me on 1 million square foot. That was called funded capacity. Well, those days, as we know, are long gone. The total market capitalization of Canadian cannabis companies, where I'm from, obviously, although this podcast will be about global cannabis with a slanting towards the US and Canada, obviously, because that is what I am most familiar with. But at its peak, Canadian cannabis market capitalization was approximately US $50 billion. US dollars 50 billion. And I think that was in October 2018. Canopy Growth, which was the largest and biggest and best of these companies, founded out of Ottawa, Canada, and Smith Falls, Canada, as I recall, had a market cap of $15 billion Canadian. And when I looked last week, as I was preparing some notes for this initial episode 0 of the Grow podcast, the market capitalization was $214 million. 214 million. Like, it's hard to get a lot lower than where Canopy is right now. So from Canadian $15 billion to 214 million Canadian market cap. The promotion and the excitement of this industry is long over. If you're in the business, you already know that. The passion over fundamentals era of this industry is over. Long gone. Dead. Gone. Over. Yet, despite that, some companies are succeeding. Restructuring solutions are available. Capital is available. We're at the bottom of this mess in the industry, and the time is now to position your cannabis business to succeed. Now, what does that mean? Position, that's a little bit of just buzzwords, right? Well, what the hell does that mean? Position your cannabis business succeed means this: less hype, less stream, less passion, more fundamentals, business fundamentals. And that is exactly what this new podcast, The Grow, is about. Business fundamentals applied to your industry, not cannabis fundamentals, business fundamentals applied to your industry and to your business. It's not about the commodity. It's not about genetics. It's not about efficacy or societal benefits, all of which is true, by the way, but it's not about that. You already know those things. It's not directly about regulation, although clearly regulation impacts business. It's not about the hot new product. I was listening to a cannabis, air quotes, business podcast the other day, and they do a great job. I don't want to pick on them. I'm not going to drop their name here. They do a good job. It was close to an hour long in a roundup of the business for the last month of cannabis. And what did they talk about? 100% of that podcast was about regulation by state, and it was about the hot new product, mostly beverages. That's what it was about. No business fundamentals whatsoever. You already know the regulatory side of this thing. You live and die by it in your industry. You already know that the hot new product and what the market wants changes like weekly. And every time you try to change your business case to deliver that hot new product, it requires a bunch of capital expenditures and a change to your supply chain. And it's a disaster, and you can't possibly keep up with all of that. You already know all of those things. This podcast is not about that. This podcast is about real business. It is about, listen to this, controlling the things that you can control. You can't control what the new administration in the US is going to do. You can't control what CRA in Canada, and well, we don't even have an administration. So you can't control any of that. This podcast is about controlling the things that you control. It's about making more money. It's about cash flow. It's about restructuring fundamentals, because many of you need to restructure. It's about raising capital, creating shareholder value, realizing on that value. And that is going to be our focus. My name's Scott Sinclair, as I said, and I've spent years working in corporate finance. I've spent some time in the cannabis space, primarily in the US and Canada, a little bit in Israel. I have a company called Sinclair Range, and that's where we do most of our work in the cannabis space. We're not cannabis exclusive. We're not even cannabis experts, but we do have lots of experience in it. I've had experience operating cannabis companies. We've had experience restructuring cannabis companies. We've had experience investing in cannabis companies, financing cannabis companies, sitting as an officer and director of cannabis companies, advising lenders to cannabis companies, buying cannabis companies. We've been in and around this space. And again, I don't pretend to be an expert on your genetics, your commodity, efficacy, health benefits, all that sort of stuff. That's not my bag. My bag is about running the business, controlling the things that you can control, and make more money. And that's what this podcast is about. Real advice, real business advice for your cannabis business. You know, some of that advice is not at all specific. In fact, much of it will not at all be specific to the cannabis industry. It is good, strong, fundamental business advice. But we're going to adapt that to your industry where appropriate. Every episode of this new podcast, The Grow, will be hosted by me. Often, it might just be me, but often I'm going to try to get relevant guests in the industry to discuss the concepts that we are going to be talking about on this podcast. And when we have guests, I'm not quite sure what that platform is going to be. It's not going to be this fancy camera in front of me with the great audio system. It'll probably be by Zoom, and we'll record it, but you'll just have to suck that up with a lesser audio quality. But I think it's important to get those guests in the door to give you different perspectives from just me. This podcast, I'm going to try and keep it short, maybe 10, 15 minutes. And as a starting point, I should have put a timer beside me, and I did not. So we'll see. This will be a surprise to me too, what this works out to be in episode 0. And we're going to try and do this podcast weekly as much as possible. That's the introduction. Let's get started. You know, the reason you do an episode 0, well, I do, in the launch of a podcast, is you want to introduce the podcast, but more importantly, well, as importantly, you want to populate the hosting platforms for this podcast. Well, this podcast will be everywhere you listen to podcasts, Apple, Spotify. It's a video, so it'll be on YouTube. I'm not sure where else we're going to put it, but anywhere that you generally look to podcasts. And what I would like you to do, if you're into this, is wherever you listen to podcasts, go there, find it, The Grow, subscribe, like, participate, reach out at the links in the note. There's notes to this, so there'll be a link to where you can reach out. What would you like me to cover? Ask some questions, engage, suggest some topics. I'm excited about this. Let's get started. We'll talk to you next week.